Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will call the Board of Examiners meeting to order. Can you hear us loud and clear in Las Vegas?
Yes, we can, Governor.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. All members are present. We'll move to agenda item number 2, public comment. Is there any member of the public present in Carson City that would like to provide public comment to the board? I hear and see no one. Is there anyone present in Las Vegas that would like to provide public comment to the board?
No, Governor, there's nobody here that wants to speak this morning.
All right, thank you, Madam Secretary. Agenda item number 3 is the approval of the February 13, 2018 meeting minutes. Have the members had an opportunity to review the minutes, and are there any changes?
Move to approve, Governor.
Attorney General has moved for approval. Is there a second?
I second it, Governor.
Secretary of State has seconded the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 3-0. We'll move to agenda item number 4, which is the Department of Administration's Victims of Crime Fund fiscal year 2018 second quarter report and recommendations for fiscal year 2018 third quarter anticipated expenses. Mr. Wells, good morning.
Good morning, Governor, and members of the board. Pursuant to NRS 217.260, the Board of Examiners is required to estimate the available revenue and anticipated claims costs for the state of Nevada's Victims of Crime program. This item includes a report on the claims paid for the second quarter of fiscal year 18 and a recommendation to pay the priority 1, 2, and 3 claims at 100% for the third quarter of fiscal year 18. When this report was submitted, the program anticipated having a reserve at the end of the third quarter of FY18 of approximately $5.3 million after covering all of their expenses and a 45-day operating reserve. This is a decrease of approximately $2.5 million from the projected reserve at the end of the second quarter and $6.4 million down from the projected reserve of $11.7 million at the end of the first quarter. This decrease is primarily due to the number of claims filed subsequent to the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival mass casualty event on October 1st. Without additional funding and at the projected claims payment rate, the fund would have a very low balance at the end of the fourth quarter. Agency representatives expect to obtain additional federal funding to offset the expenses that were associated with the October 1st event. Given the additional federal funding for that event, then $5.3 million appears to be reasonable for the program. However, if that additional grant funding is not received or not received timely, the board would have to consider reducing the percentage of the approved amount of paid for claims in future quarters. My understanding is that the representatives from Victims of Crime are going to provide some updated projections for the third quarter that will actually result in an increase in the projected reserve at the end of this quarter. And they should be available in Las Vegas.
Yeah, good morning. I would like to hear from you. Do you have a formal presentation that you wanted to make, Ms. Salazar?
Yes, thank you. I'm Rebecca Salazar, Program Manager for Victims of Crime.
And Michelle Morgando, Acting Coordinator. Yes. We do have some updated numbers that we obtained yesterday. As of yesterday, the total amount paid for the second quarter is $1.455 million. And using that number, we still have 3 weeks left in this quarter. We projected payments for the third quarter at $1,798,000, which is far less than what's in the report. Obviously, this was something that the program has never dealt with. And so out of an abundance of caution, we probably set the projections a little high, but rather than come in and having underestimated, I think that we're probably at a status right now where the claim payments are leveling out for the Route 91, and we're getting a much better idea for the claim payments that will be going forward, particularly with claims that are catastrophic at this point. Our filing deadline is October 1 of 2018, and we're still working on our media and social media outreach to try and obtain as many victim applications as we can. And I think we have just shy of 5,000 right now. We do.
Yeah, so therefore,
5,000 claims you said you had?
as of yesterday, we have 4,415 applications.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Ms. Salazar, I interrupted you. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say that now that we are almost 6 months out from the event, I think going forward we have a better picture of what we've paid, what our trends are looking like, and going forward our estimates will be much more realistic versus this high estimate that we had in the report. We just have a better idea now of what we're dealing with going forward.
Yeah. But your estimates were very conservative. So in other words, there's more money in the fund than you thought there was going to be.
Not necessarily that there's more money, but just that we are spending less than we thought. When this started, we just didn't know what to expect, what kind of bills would be coming in. And now with the history, we're able to see what kind of payments we're making and what we can expect going forward.
And this whole conversation considers the fact that you have not received any federal reimbursement that Mr. Wells alluded to?
Yes, that's correct.
And have you received any communications regarding the timeliness of that reimbursement?
No specifics. It's all still in the draft stages. We're hoping there will be some sort of response within the next few months, but we don't have anything concrete at this point.
And I'm not familiar with that process. Is it an if or a when? In other words, is it we're going to get that reimbursement, but we just don't know when?
That is my understanding, yes.
And would it be a dollar for dollar reimbursement?
That is our hope. That is what our application requests, but it'll depend on the decision makers they'll decide what we receive. I can tell you that in other events of this nature, it's been a dollar for dollar reimbursement.
Well, and I guess my final question is, for sure, I want to reimburse the victims dollar for dollar. On the other hand, though, assuming we don't get those federal funds, I also don't want to deplete the fund to a point where those that apply late don't get full reimbursement. So do we need to start considering limiting or not providing full reimbursements in the event that we don't get the federal reimbursement?
I don't believe at this point that we need to do that because we have after this, we'll have about $8 million in reserve, and that is sufficient according to our history. So that may be something we want to consider in future quarters, but at this point, we don't believe that that's necessary.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Salazar. Those are all my questions. Do the other board members have questions?
Yes, Governor. Thank you. So I don't believe when I first started on this board that we were doing 1, 2, and 3 at 100%. I think that we shifted into that somewhere in the last few years. Maybe Governor or Secretary of State could correct me on that. But my main question is, we've seen categories 1, 2, 3 at 100% for at least a year, from my recollection now. I mean, is this something that we're separate from the October 1 shooting for the rest of the state and all our claims? I mean, are we still very confident that this fund can support categories 1, 2, or 3 at 100%?
We are, and actually, since I've been in victims of crime, which is 8 years now, we've been at 100% for that.
For all
entire
3
time.
categories?
Yeah,
Okay.
the last time that I remember going short is maybe 2008.
Okay.
So it's been quite a while. We've been comfortable with what we have in reserve.
Great. Thank you.
Any questions, Madam Secretary?
No, Governor, I'm very supportive and will support this, and thank you, ladies, very much for all your comments.
No, thank you. And that was my recollection. I appreciate your confirming that, Ms. Salazar, that we have been able, fortunately, to be able to pay it 100%. And so would like to continue to do so. And I'm comfortable that we have an adequate amount in reserve to be able to continue to do that. And I suppose since we do meet monthly, you'll be able to update us on the status of any federal reimbursement.
Yes, of course.
All right. I just want to make sure that when I call for the motion that it's accurate. So would we be approving the Department of Administration's Victims of Crime Fund fiscal year 2018 second quarter report, as well as the recommendations for the fiscal year 2018 third quarter anticipated expenses?
That's correct, Governor. You would be approving the anticipated expenses for all three categories at 100% according to the recommendation.
Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, the Secretary of State has moved to approve the recommendations of the Victims of Crime Fund for fiscal year 2018 third quarter as presented in agenda item number 4.
I second.
Attorney General is seconding the motion. Any questions or discussion on the motion? Hear none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. That motion passes unanimously. We'll move to agenda item number 5, which is the review and consideration of a Victims of Crime appeal. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Governor. NRS 217 regulates the compensation for certain victims of criminal acts. Victims apply to the program and a determination is made as to whether or not the victim is entitled to compensation from the program. A victim whose claims are denied can appeal to a hearings officer to have their claims reconsidered, and either the victim or the clerk of the Board of Examiners can appeal that decision of the hearings officer to an appeals officer. Both the hearings officer and appeals officer processes are under the jurisdiction of the Department of Administration. Upon the appeals officer's decision, NRS 217.117 subsection 3 allows either the applicant or the clerk of the Board of Examiners to appeal the decision made by the appeals officer to the Board of Examiners. The Board of Examiners can either render a decision in the case or hold a hearing on this matter. The item for consideration today is a review of the record of an appeals officer decision of an appeal by the applicant, Anna Darbinian, on behalf of the estate of Babkin Darbinian. Ms. Darbinian was notified of the meeting today, and while she does have a desire to provide public comment on the issue and believes that a full hearing is warranted, she was unable to attend today's meeting, either in person or telephonically. Within 15 days of today's hearing, the board shall render its decision in the case. The board may affirm, modify, or reverse the decision of the appeals officer, or it can decide to hold a hearing on the matter within 30 days, in which case it would reconsider the evidence provided by both the applicant and the Victims of Crime program. And Ms. Salazar and Ms. Morgando are available to answer any questions board members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. And just for the purposes of the record, the appellant was provided notice of the hearing and advised your office or advised the program that she would be unable to participate both at the meeting or telephonically.
That is correct. We did reach out to her and provide her the opportunity to appear, and we also offered the opportunity for her to call in as she doesn't reside in Nevada and is currently out of state.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wells. So, Ms. Salazar, a question for me. So the appellant sought to increase the cap from the $35,000 and have this matter declared a catastrophic event. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the answer to that was yes.
Yes.
Okay. And let me back up. I mean, it just, again, for the purposes of the record, this was a horrible event and that resulted in a fatality. But the appellant and the family was reimbursed 100% for all expenses associated with the crime that was committed, the medical bills, the funeral bills, any behavioral health bills. Is that correct?
The family was reimbursed not at 100%, but 100% of our approved reimbursement amount. For instance, the funeral, our limit on funeral is $5,000. They were reimbursed $5,000. Their cost for funeral exceeded $5,000. And the same for counseling. But we did reimburse 100% of every medical bill that they submitted.
Is there any outstanding bills associated with the event that have not been paid?
None that we have. During the appeal hearing, Mrs. Darbinian said that she had unreimbursed medical, and she's been invited to submit those bills, but she has not.
Okay, and then, so then what is she seeking compensation for? in the appeal?
What she seeks compensation for is a full reimbursement of the funeral costs, which total just under $20,000, and a full reimbursement of her counseling, her grief counseling. Our counseling is paid pursuant to a fee schedule, and which is how we paid it. She still has additional funds available for counseling, but she seeks reimbursement of what she paid versus our reimbursement schedule.
Okay. So let me break that down. On the funeral expenses, that $5,000 is a statutory cap, correct?
It's a policy cap.
Policy cap. And then
Yes.
on the behavioral health, the medical provider has been paid everything that it is entitled to, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, those are all the questions that I have. Madam Secretary or Mr. Attorney General, do you have any questions?
I don't have any.
I do not either, Governor.
And as I said, these are difficult because this was a horrible crime, and I feel very badly for the appellant and what she has gone through. But at least from the record that I've reviewed, as well as the testimony today given by Ms. Salazar, it's my opinion that the Victims of Crime program has provided all the benefits to which the appellant is entitled to. So I guess having said that, I would support a motion to affirm the decision of the appeals officer.
I'll make that motion to support the appeals process, their motion, and I thank you for your comments, Governor.
Okay. So the Secretary of State has moved to affirm the decision of the appeals officer presented in agenda item number 5. Is there a second?
I second, Governor.
Attorney General has seconded the motion. Any questions or discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say no. That motion passes 3-0. We'll move on to agenda item number 6, which is a request to purchase state vehicles. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Governor. There are 3 requests for 5 vehicles in this agenda item this morning. The first request is from the Department of Administration Fleet Services Division to purchase 1 replacement vehicle for the gaming control board, which was stolen, and 2 replacement vehicles for the Division of Child and Family Services that were totaled in accidents using insurance proceeds and agency reserves. And this vehicle purchase is subject to the approval of a work program at the April IFC meeting. The second request is from the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources Environmental Protection Division to purchase 1 replacement vehicle for the Bureau of Mining, Regulation, and Reclamation that has met the age and/or mileage requirements in the State Administrative Manual. This vehicle was included in the agency's legislatively approved budget. And finally, the third request is from the Department of Public Safety State Fire Marshal's Office to purchase 1 replacement vehicle for which the lease will expire this month. This vehicle will be purchased using a 50-50 split between State Emergency Response Commission and Hazardous Waste Management funds. This vehicle also is subject to approval of a work program at the April IFC meeting. And there are representatives available to answer any questions board members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. I have no questions. Board members, any questions with regard to agenda item number 6?
Move to approve.
Attorney General has moved to approve the request to purchase state vehicles in agenda item number 6. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Governor.
Secretary of State has seconded the motion. Any questions or discussion? Hear none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 3-0. We'll move on to agenda item number 7, which is a request to pay a cash settlement. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Governor. Item 7 includes a request for approval of a cash settlement from the Department of Transportation relating to the I-15 Star Management Interchange Project. The request in the amount of $1,372,625 will fully resolve an eminent domain action to acquire approximately 3.5 acres of real property. Approval of the additional amount would bring the total settlement to $3.33 million. And Mr. Nellis and Mr. Gallagher from the Department of Transportation are available to answer any questions.
Morning, gentlemen. Good morning, Mr. Gallagher.
Good morning. For the record, Dennis Gallagher with the Office of the Attorney General, Counsel for NDOT. With me is Robert Nellis, the Assistant Director for the department, and hopefully in Las Vegas, Special Counsel Joe Vidala, who is lead attorney on this matter. Wish you all a good morning. As Mr. Wells indicated, the department is requesting an additional sum of money to settle both an eminent domain matter regarding the Star interchange, as well as acquire 2 remaining acres from this particular parcel. So the total acquisition will be about 3.5 acres. The financial terms are very favorable to the state. Acquisition of the additional 2 acres will provide the department a staging area for the project, which will save potentially lease cost for the contractor. In addition, when the contract is, or the project is completed, the department could offer that property for sale as surplus, and given its vicinity to the I-15 Star interchange, it could be a valuable piece of property. The property owner is in support of this settlement, and it will bring complete closure to the litigation and provide the department the excess real property. I don't know if you have any particular questions or any of the other members do, but at the end of the day, this is a very fair settlement for both the property owners as well as the taxpayers of the state of Nevada. And I'd like to commend Joe for his tenacity and perseverance in the negotiations that ultimately brings this matter before this board today.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. And we've done this enough times where you've anticipated my questions. And I just finally, you do believe that the requested settlement is in the best interest of the state?
That is correct, sir.
No, and I haven't, with my experience on the transportation board, I always prefer things to end up this way in terms of the property owner being happy and the state being happy, because as you said, we have to do it to take care of the property owner whose property we're taking, but at the same time, we have to be a good shepherd of the public's money. Yes. And so, I guess the one other question I have, with the exposure might have been much in excess of what is being presented here today.
That is correct. At one time, the property owner was insistent, and he's a very experienced real estate broker in Clark County, that the property was worth $7 million. And in addition to that, statutorily, if we go to court, the state is responsible not only for its own costs, but also the costs incurred by the landowner. So, there's another $100,000 right there in this case.
So, and that's the other point that you made is we're paying the total of $3.3 million, but we are going to get some of that money back later on if we choose to sell that property.
That is correct.
Okay. All right, I have no further questions. Board members, any questions with regard to agenda item number 7?
I don't.
Good work.
So if there are no further questions, the chair will accept a motion to approve the request to pay a cash settlement in the sum of $1,372,625 as presented in agenda item number 7.
So moved, Governor.
Secretary of State has moved for approval. Is there a second?
I second.
Attorney General will second the motion. Any questions or discussion on the motion? Hear none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 3-0. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Move to agenda item number 8, request to designate positions in state government as critical labor shortages. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Governor. Pursuant to NRS 286.523, it's the policy of the state to ensure that the reemployment of retired public employees is limited to positions of extreme need. An employer who desires to employ a retired public employee to fill a position for which a critical labor shortage designation has been made must make that determination of reemployment based on the appropriate and necessary delivery of services to the public in an open meeting. The Board of Examiners has the authority to designate positions in state government for which there are critical labor shortage. In determining whether to designate a position as a critical labor shortage, the board is to consider and make findings on the efforts made to fill the position through other means, the turnover rate for the position, the number of openings and the number of qualified candidates, the length of time the position has been vacant, any special circumstances, education, or experience requirements for the positions, and the history and success of recruitment efforts. There are 2 requests for designation of critical labor shortage in this agenda item that will need to be considered separately. Should the board approve the designations, it can delegate to the clerk the notice of the designation to PERS, and I will work with the 2 departments to ensure that those are submitted timely. The first request is from the Department of Health and Human Services Aging and Disability Services Division to designate the physical therapist pediatric classification as a critical labor shortage and grant a PERS exception for a contract with Robin Hickman. This designation is requested through June 30th of this year. And the second request is from the Department of Corrections. The Department of Corrections requested and the board approved the designation of the correctional officer classifications as critical labor shortage positions for rural areas in March of 2016. This item includes a report from the department on the use and effectiveness of the critical labor shortage designation and a request to continue the designation of correctional officer classifications as critical labor shortage positions in rural areas, which would allow the department to continue to reemploy retired public employees who require little or no training to perform important correctional officer duties. And Ms. Schmidt and her staff are here to present the first item, and Mr. Barrowman and his staff are here to present the second.
Good morning. Please proceed.
There it goes. Good morning. Dina Schmidt for the record, Administrator for Aging and Disability Services, and with me today is Ricky Robb, my Deputy Administrator over Children's Services. We are requesting to designate the pediatric physical therapist position as a critical labor shortage. We've had difficulty recruiting a qualified pediatric physical therapist for quite some time, especially in the rural areas. We've had a vacancy in this position since 2011.
And my only question is, why would you do it only through June 30, 2018?
That request was just to align with we'll have to come back and do this again. It was to align with the provider agreement changes to contracts.
All right. So I have no problem with this. And so what are we doing? I guess we have this individual who's retired and bring her back to continue services.
Good morning, Ricky Robb, Deputy Administrator for Aging and Disability Services. Currently, we have someone that she is actually able to work up to a certain amount of hours, but we are not able to hit the 30 hours to be able to meet the needs of those children. So she is currently working, but we need the critical shortage hours.
And so that the kids are getting served if we do this?
Correct. It will continue their services. Versus if we were not able to get the critical shortage, it would stop those services to the children.
Thank you very much. Board members, any questions with regard to agenda item 8A?
I want to thank you, and Governor, it's sad because we've got so many critical needs out there, not only for the rural areas, but even in our classrooms for special teachers. And this just falls in line with that, and it's just sad that our universities, that we're not able to provide what the community needs. So I'm hopeful that we are able to do some discussions with the colleges, the community colleges, to tell them of the shortages and encourage them to help us find people that can fill these positions. And I want to thank you for always pointing out to us the years I've been on the Board of Examiners, the shortages and the needs that we have in our state. So I will support this, and just hopeful that we can work with the different entities to make sure that we don't have to continue to keep doing this. Although I know she's very qualified, I do know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Any other questions? There are none. Thank you very much. We'll move to agenda item 8B, Department of Corrections. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for your time. My name is John Barman. I'm the Deputy Director of Support Services for the Department of Corrections. Down south, we do have Director Zarenda available for testimony. This is primarily regarding the vacancies that we have in our rural areas. As we know, through session, we had reached a high of approximately 180 correctional officers, vacant positions. And through the approved budget, Governor recommends an approved budget, we did have an increase in officer salary. And through our diligent pursuit of filling those vacancies, we are now under 100. So we've made substantial progress cutting those vacancies almost in half. The request in front of us today is to recognize that some of our most difficult areas to recruit are in the rural areas. Today we have 79 vacancies in the locations that are identified in the request. So you can see that this represents a substantial challenge in our recruitment effort. The urban areas are very successful. The rural areas, we have a substantial challenge. In particular, we have some very remote camps that are sensitive when they only have 13 FTE in particular assigned to the entire camp. When you have 5 vacancies or 8 vacancies or 2 vacancies and you have turnover upon those vacancies, it creates a substantial challenge. What we found is that through this critical labor designation, we have been able to hire retired employees. We have a history of some joining our employment and then leaving for various reasons. Currently, we do have 8 employed based on the designation that was given to us approximately 2 years ago. And we are asking to continue this program to use available resources out in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barman. So a favorable vote today would allow you to maintain those 8 that you've hired. Do you have any other individuals that are ready, willing, and able to take on some of these vacancies?
Thank you, John Barman. I appreciate the question. We did have people that were not former correctional officer employees, but were still quite qualified to do the job. Specifically, we had people retire from municipal law enforcement out in the rural areas that were interested. They approached us a couple months ago, and given that it wasn't something we explicitly put on the record 2 years ago, this particular request is a little more transparent, and I appreciate being able to put it on the record audibly, and that is that it isn't just retired correctional officers that we are interested in hiring. Anybody who is interested in coming to work for the Department of Corrections, we are willing to accept their application, and if they are fit and appropriate, we'll provide the training to do so. That includes if there are some retired municipal law enforcement officers out in the rural areas. We would welcome those to help us out with this.
Thank you, Mr. Barman. Any questions from the other board members?
Governor, I support this request, but our office had a little bit of a concern of the language that we specifically mention a rural correction officer, which isn't technically a thing. So I would suggest that we strike the word rural, but we can make a motion to condition this action item on use in rural facilities. So it's a little bit of a technical cleanup, but if you guys are open to it, I would recommend that.
No, I'm fine with it. I think it's okay because rural is in quotes, but if you want to make that the form of the motion, I'm fine with it. I see you, Director Zarenda. Was there anything you wanted to add?
No, sir.
Okay. So if there are no further questions or comments, Mr. Attorney General, if you want to form a motion consistent with what you just stated, please proceed.
So I move to strike the word rural, but add in the same motion that we condition these critical shortage positions to rural facilities.
I don't know if we want to do that. Director Zarenda or Mr. Barrowman.
To the, I'm sorry, Governor, let me be more specific, to the listed rural facilities in this particular action item. Does that cover you, Director?
I don't see it, this is James Joyner for the record, I don't see any issues with that, I'm sorry, I don't see any issues with that language unless, I'm missing something. I think it does meet our requirements that we're looking for.
So would you repeat that just for clarity, Mr. Attorney General?
So I move to strike the word rural and condition this motion on the listed designated rural areas in this action item.
And that would be Ely, Pioche, Wells, Humboldt, Jean, Carlin, Tonopah, and Lovelock.
Yes, sir.
All right. So you've heard the motion. Is there a second, Madam Secretary?
Yes, Governor, I second the motion.
Secretary of State has seconded the motion. Any questions or discussion on the motion? Hear none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 3-0. On Department of Corrections, we do need to approve agenda item 8A. So is there a motion to approve the Department of Health and Human Services Aging and Disability Services Division request?
I move to approve 8A, Governor.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Is there a second?
We just did. Additionally?
Yeah, we just did.
Okay. I second.
Attorney General has seconded the motion. Any questions or discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 3-0. Thank you, Mr. Barrowman. Thank you, Director Zarenda. We'll move to agenda item number 9, which is approval of payment to the Secretary of the United States Treasury pursuant to the Cash Management Improvement Act. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Governor. Item 9 is a request from the State Controller pursuant to Section 80 of Assembly Bill 518 from the 2017 legislative session, which authorizes a payment not to exceed $68,354 to the United States Treasury for interest owed under the Cash Management Improvement Act, or CMIA. The CMIA ensures efficiency and equity between the time that federal funds are drawn and expended, with the state incurring an interest liability if it draws funds too early, and the federal government incurring a liability to the state if the state uses its funds for federal program purposes. The amount shown is the highest possible state liability for fiscal year 2017. The U.S. Treasury is currently reviewing the report submitted by the State Controller and should provide a final determination by March 15th. If the calculations by the State Controller are accepted by the U.S. Treasury, the federal government will owe the state $133,790. Last March, the board approved a payment not to exceed $21,526 for fiscal year 2016, and the final amount was a payment from the federal government to the state in the amount of $2,401. And there are representatives available from the State Controller's Office to answer any questions the board members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. I have no questions, and I want to make sure, and you did, clarified it for the record, it's not that we owe the federal government $68,354. In fact, they're going to owe us, but this is indeed the maximum liability just in case.
That is correct. This represents the absolute maximum liability should all of the calculations from the Treasurer's Office be denied, or Controller's Office, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Board members, any further questions with regard to agenda item number 9?
No, Governor.
Okay, is there a motion to approve payment to the Secretary of the United States Treasury pursuant to the Cash Management Improvement Act in the sum of $68,354?
Move for approval.
Secretary of State has moved for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by the Attorney General. Any questions or discussion on the motion? There are none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 3-0. We move to agenda item number 10, which is a request for recommendation of approval to the IFC Committee for a grant from the Disaster Relief Account in the sum of $23,084.01 by the City of Caliente. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Governor. Pursuant to NRS 353.2755, local governments can request a grant or a loan through the Division of Emergency Management from the Disaster Relief Account if, because of the disaster, the local government is unable to pay for expenses from available funds. Applicants must submit their intention to apply not later than 60 days after the governing body of a local government determines an event constitutes a disaster. Within 18 months of that determination, Unless the administrator of the Division of Emergency Management grants an extension, the local government must submit their final request to the Division of Emergency Management and the Department of Taxation, including whether the request is for a loan or a grant and the final amount of the request. The Division of Emergency Management and the Department of Taxation are required to review the requests and submit reports to the Board of Examiners, who will make a recommendation to the Interim Finance Committee on the proposed amount and the determination of whether a grant or loan should be provided to the local government. This request from the City of Caliente relating to expenses incurred during a flash flood event in July of 2015 is for a grant from the disaster relief account. The city provided financial records and supporting documentation showing labor, equipment, and supply costs incurred in the amount of $46,168.02. Pursuant to NRS 353.2745, the city is eligible for a grant of not more than 50% of the expenses incurred for the repair and replacement of roads and facilities damaged by the disaster. Therefore, the city may request not more than $23,084.01 from the disaster relief account. The Division of Emergency Management provided a letter determining that the event did constitute a local disaster, and the Department of Taxation provided a letter documenting the financial condition of the city and the impact of these costs on its ability to provide services to residents. Pursuant to subsection 6 of NRS 353.2755, the Board of Examiners shall consider the request and the reports from the Division of Emergency Management and Department of Taxation and may require additional information as deemed necessary to make any recommendations. And then pursuant to subsection 7, after considering that information, the action for the board this morning is to make a recommendation to the Interim Finance Committee on whether or not a grant or a loan to the City of Caliente is appropriate, and if deemed appropriate by the board, the amount of the grant or loan, and if it is a loan, any repayment terms, and if it is not deemed appropriate to pay money from the disaster relief account, a reason for that determination. And then there are representatives available from the Division of Emergency Management to answer any additional questions.
Chief Gage, good morning.
Morning, Governor, members of the board.
Is there anything you wanted to provide on the record, Chief Gage?
Just wanted to say that from the Division of Emergency Management standpoint, Governor, the City of Caliente has been extremely proactive and active in this process and great to work with. We support this request and think it is a justifiable request from the city, and happy to answer any questions you may have, Governor, or members.
Now, the only question I have is, this happened way back in 2015. Is this typical for how long the process takes?
Thank you, Governor. Caleb Cage for the record. Yes, the jurisdictions have 18 months to file an application after the first 30 days following, and so this is typical. This is the second one that I've been involved in, and both happened in consecutive weeks in July since I started. So yes, this is typical.
Thank you. Any questions from other board members?
I have none.
If there are no further questions, the chair will accept a motion to approve the request for recommendation of approval to the IFC Committee for a grant from the Disaster Relief Account for the City of Caliente in the sum of $23,084.01.
Move to approve.
Attorney General has moved to approve. Is there a second?
I second it, Governor.
Secretary of State has seconded the motion. Any questions or discussion? I hear none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 3-0. Thank you, gentlemen. Agenda item number 11, which are requests for approval to pay a stale claim from the stale claims account. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Governor. Item 11 includes two requests from the Department of Transportation to pay late invoices pursuant to NRS 353.097. The first request is to pay the Clark County School District $85,846.71 for the Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Education Program for the period of October 1st, 2016 through April 30th, 2017. The invoice from the school district was received by the department in December, which was after the cutoff for processing fiscal year 2017 transactions. The second request is to pay the University of Nevada, Reno $81,331.41 for pavement design and material evaluation for the period of April 1st, 2017 through June 30th of 2017. The invoice was received by the department in September, which was also after the cutoff date for fiscal year 2017 transactions. The funds in these programs did not balance forward, but the department did revert sufficient funds to cover their costs, and the claims would be paid from the Highway Fund stale claims account. And there are representatives from the Department of Transportation if there are any additional questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. I have no questions. Board members, any questions on agenda item number 11?
None, Governor.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the stale claims as presented in agenda item number 11?
Move to approve.
Attorney General has moved to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by the Secretary of State. Any questions or discussion? Hear none. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 3-0. We'll move to agenda item number 12, which are requests for designations of bad debts. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Governor. Most state agencies turn their uncollectible debts over to the state controller, who has the authority to request the Board of Examiners write off bad debt that has become impossible or impractical to collect. Bad debt under the purview of the state controller cannot be removed from the state's books unless the Board of Examiners designates the bad debt as uncollectible. Prior to the passage and approval of Assembly Bill 14 from the 2015 legislative session, the Division of Industrial Relations Advisory Council and the Nevada Gaming Commission, by the affirmative vote of a majority of their respective members, could remove from the records the name of a debtor and the amount of the tax, penalty, or interest owed by a debtor if, after a period of 3 years for DIR or 5 years for the Gaming Commission, they remained impossible or impractical to collect. Assembly Bill 14 amended the respective statutes and requires the DIR Advisory Council and the Gaming Commission to report the debt determined to be impossible or impractical to collect to the Board of Examiners for designation as bad debt. Upon such designation, the clerk of the Board of Examiners shall notify the state controller to remove the debt from the state's books. This item includes 2 requests to designate debts as bad debts under those provisions. The first request from the Nevada Gaming Control Board is to request $5,131.25 as bad debt for the purpose of removing 3 debts from the state's books. And the second request is from the Department of Business and Industries Division of Industrial Relations, which will designate $761,721.01 as bad debts for the purpose of removing them from the state's books. As a point of reference from last year, the agency's requests were $8,956 for the Gaming Control Board and $860,028 for the Division of Industrial Relations. And there are representatives available to answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. And I suppose, just for the purpose of the record, I'd love to have some testimony as to what the extent of the efforts are to collect these. There are some that it said were referred to the controller's office, others that just simply say collection attempts unsuccessful. So is there anyone present who can answer those questions? Yes. All right. And I'm referring to not the Gaming Control Board, but the Department of Business and Industry.
Good morning, Governor, board members. J.D. Decker, Administrator for the Division of Industrial Relations. We have varying collection efforts based on the various types of fines or penalties that we're attempting to collect. Some of them are on uninsured employers, in which claims are paid from the uninsured employer's account to injured workers. And then there are collection attempts made by the division to recover from the uninsured employer, which is generally going to be unsuccessful because they were uninsured in the first place. Others are fines and penalties through the OSHA program or the Employer Compliance Unit.